The metal chair scraped against the floor as Commander Thexnall shifted his weight. His 6 arms moved restlessly, the chitinous armor plating that covered his body clicking softly with each motion. The bright lights of the interrogation room reflected off his compound eyes, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the stark white walls. Across from him sat 3 beings from different worlds. A tall, thin Altarian with pale blue skin tapped her fingers on the data pad in front of her. Next to her, a stocky Krellian male adjusted his breathing apparatus, the device hissing quietly as it filtered the station's atmosphere. The third, member of the tribunal, was human, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and tired eyes that seemed to look right through him. Thexnall had been on this neutral station for 2 days now, waiting for this moment. The Galactic War Crimes Tribunal wanted his testimony about the human-Zephyrian conflict. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but the memories still felt fresh. They burned in his mind like plasma fire. The Altarian spoke first, her voice crisp and formal. "Commander Thexnall of the Zephyrian Third Fleet, you are here voluntarily to provide testimony regarding incidents that occurred during the recent conflict with Earth forces. Do you understand why you are here?" Thexnall's mandibles clicked together, a nervous habit he had developed during the war. "Yes, I understand. I want to tell you what happened. What we saw. What those humans did to us." The human tribunal member leaned forward slightly. Her name tag read, Dr. Martinez, but Thexnall tried not to look at it too closely. Human names still made his skin crawl with memory. "Commander, before we begin, I want you to know that this testimony is being recorded for historical purposes. Nothing you say here will be used against you in any legal proceedings. We simply want to understand what happened during the conflict." Thexnall nodded, though the gesture looked strange on his insect-like head. "I will tell you everything, but you must understand. What I saw changes how you think about humans. Before the war, we thought we knew what they were. We were wrong." Deep bow. Krellian's breathing apparatus hissed as he spoke. "Please begin with your first encounter with human forces. Take your time." Thexnall's compound eyes dimmed as he reached back into his memories. His voice became quiet, almost whisper-soft. "It was on New Haven, a farming world in what you call the outer colonies. Our intelligence said it would be easy. Humans were supposed to be weak, soft. They had only been in space for a few hundred years. We had been traveling between stars for thousands." He paused, one of his hands absently tracing a scar that ran across his chest plate. "The High Command classified humans as Class C species. Primitive technology, basic weapons, simple tactics. They told us the invasion would take maybe a week. Most of that would just be travel time between cities." The Altarian made notes on her data pad. "What was your role in the invasion force?" "I was a battalion commander then. Younger, more confident. I had 1,200 soldiers under my command. We had fought against 6 different species before humans. We always won quickly." Thexnall's mandibles clicked again. New Haven was supposed to be my easiest victory. The human tribunal member, Dr. Martinez, watched him carefully. "What happened when you arrived at New Haven?" Thexnall's body shuddered slightly. "We came down from orbit in full force. 30 dropships carrying the entire battalion. Our target was a small farming community called Millbrook. Maybe 5,000 humans lived there. Our scouts said they had one small defense post with maybe 20 soldiers." He stopped talking for a moment, his breathing becoming heavier. The sound was strange, like wind through dry leaves. "The defense post was run by a Captain Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Lisa Davis. We thought we would overwhelm them in minutes. Drop in, eliminate resistance, secure the town. Standard procedure." The Krellian leaned forward. "But that is not what happened." "No." Thexnall's voice became even quieter. "When our ships landed, Morrison and Davis were waiting for us. 20 humans against 1,200 Zephyrians. The odds were impossible. Any rational species would have surrendered immediately." Dr. Martinez made a note. "But they did not surrender." Thexnall's compound eyes fixed on her, and for a moment the human woman saw something in them that made her uncomfortable. Fear. Raw, deep fear. Humans are not rational. That was our first mistake. We thought they would behave like other species. Calculate odds, make logical decisions, preserve their lives when defeat was certain. The Altarian stopped writing. What did they do instead? They fought. The words came out like a hiss. Morrison had positioned his people in the buildings around the landing zone. When we came down, they opened fire from every direction. But that was not the strange part. Every species does that. The strange part was how they fought. Thexnell stood up suddenly, his 6 arms gesturing as he spoke. The tribunal members tensed, but he was just trying to explain something that still confused him. Morrison lost his left arm in the first exchange of fire. A plasma bolt took it, clean off. Any Zephyrian would have retreated to get medical treatment. Any Krellian would have called for backup. Any Altarian would have tried to negotiate. He sat back down, his voice filled with something that might have been admiration mixed with terror. Morrison picked up his severed arm, used it to prop up his rifle, and kept firing. He fought harder after he was wounded than before. Lisa Davis was coordinating the evacuation of civilians while directing defensive fire. She had been shot 3 times but refused medical treatment until every non-combatant was safe. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the air recycling system. The tribunal members exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected to hear. Dr. Martinez spoke carefully. "Commander, you say this engagement was supposed to last minutes. How long did it actually take?" Thexnell's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme stress. 6 hours. 6 hours for 20 humans to hold off 1,200 Zephyrian soldiers. We had better weapons, better armor, better training. We had air support and heavy vehicles. They had small arms and determination. The Altarian looked up from her notes. "How many casualties did your force take?" 537 dead, another 200 wounded. Thexnell's voice was barely audible now. "More than we lost in our last 3 campaigns combined. Morrison and Davis killed or wounded over half my battalion before we finally overwhelmed their position." The Krellian's breathing apparatus cycled loudly in the quiet room. "And the human casualties?" Thexnell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made all 3 tribunal members lean forward. 18 dead, 2 wounded. Morrison and Davis were among the dead. They could have retreated. They could have saved themselves. Instead, they stayed in position until every civilian transport had cleared the combat zone. Dr. Martinez set down her pen. "You seem troubled by this, Commander. In war, soldiers are expected to fight." Thexnell's compound eyes turned to her, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Doctor, you do not understand. In that 6-hour battle, I learned something about your species that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. About courage. About what it means to be alive." The Altarian prompted him gently. "What did you learn?" Thexnell's voice became stronger, more certain. "I learned that humans do not fight to win. They fight for something else. Something we had never encountered before. Morrison could have saved his own life. Davis could have run when the situation became hopeless. But they chose to stay. They chose to die so that others could live." He stood up again, his scarred carapace catching the light. "That was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, I would learn that every human soldier carried that same impossible choice inside them, the choice to value something more than their own survival. We thought we were fighting an army. We were fighting an idea. And ideas, Dr. Martinez, are much harder to kill than soldiers." The room remained silent as the weight of his words settled over the tribunal. Outside the station's windows, stars wheeled slowly in the darkness of space, silent witnesses to the wars that raged between the worlds they illuminated. The tribunal room stayed quiet for several minutes after Thexnell finished speaking about New Haven. Dr. Martinez poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted it to her lips. The Altarian and Krellian members whispered to each other in their own languages, their voices too low for the translation devices to pick up. Thexnell remained standing, his 6 arms held at his sides. The scars on his carapace seemed to catch more light now, creating patterns that shifted as he breathed. His compound eyes never left the human woman across from him. Finally, Dr. Martinez set down her glass and looked directly at the Zephyrian. "Commander, you said that was just the beginning. What happened next?" Thexanol's mandibles clicked softly. 3 weeks after New Haven, High Command decided we needed a major victory. Something to show the other worlds that humans could be defeated. They chose Crimson Ridge. The Altarian looked up from her notes. What was Crimson Ridge? A mining facility on the edge of human space. Important for their metal production, but not heavily defended. Intelligence said maybe 200 humans worked there, mostly civilians with a small security force. Thexnol's voice carried a bitter edge. Intelligence was wrong about humans every single time. The Krellian adjusted his breathing apparatus. "You were assigned to this operation?" "I was promoted after New Haven, field commander. They gave me 3 full battalions and told me to take Crimson Ridge quickly. The plan was simple. Orbital bombardment first, then ground assault. Secure the facility, take prisoners, move on. To the next target." Thexnol sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight. "We thought it would take maybe 2 days. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. But it did not. Thexnol's compound eyes dimmed as he remembered. When we arrived in the system, Crimson Ridge looked exactly like our intelligence report said it would. A mining complex built into the side of a mountain. 1 landing pad, basic defensive walls. A few weapon emplacements that looked 50 years old. He paused, one hand touching the deepest scar on his chest. Colonel Ben Harris commanded the human forces there, 43 years old, former military engineer. Our files said he had been running the mining operation for 6 years, a civilian administrator, not a soldier. The Altarian made notes on her datapad. What made him different? Thexanol's voice became quieter. Harris had 3 weeks to prepare after New Haven. 3 weeks to turn a mining facility into something our tactical computers could not understand. When we began the orbital bombardment, nothing happened the way it was supposed to. The Krellian leaned forward. "Explain." "Our plasma cannons hit the defensive walls and they absorbed the energy instead of exploding. Harris had somehow modified the mining equipment to create energy-dampening fields. The weapons emplacements we thought were old turned out to be camouflaged, positions hiding modern railguns. And the landing pad..." Thexnol's mandibles clicked rapidly. "The landing pad was a trap." Dr. Martinez set down her pen. "A trap?" Harris had hollowed out the ground underneath it. When our dropships landed, the entire platform collapsed. 12 ships and 600 soldiers fell into mining tunnels that had been rigged with explosives. We lost half our force before the ground assault even began. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air recycling system. The tribunal members looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. The Altarian spoke first. "How did a mining facility engineer accomplish this?" Thexnol's voice carried something that might have been respect. Harris had convinced every human on Crimson Ridge to stay and fight. Not just the security forces, the miners, the technicians, the cooks and maintenance workers. 300 civilians who chose to become soldiers because Harris asked them to. He stood up again, pacing to the small window that looked out at the stars. They turned mining charges into anti-armor weapons. They reprogrammed the industrial mechs to carry weapons instead of mining tools. They used the tunnel system to move around beneath us like ghosts. The Krellian's breathing apparatus cycled loudly. "How long did the siege last?" 3 weeks. Thexanol's reflection in the window showed his compound eyes staring into space. 3 weeks of fighting an enemy we could not see. An enemy that seemed to know our every move before we made it. Dr. Martinez made a note. "How could they anticipate your tactics?" Thexnol turned back to face the tribunal. Harris had studied every battle we had ever fought, every campaign against every species for the last 50 years. He knew Zephyrian military doctrine better than some of our own commanders. But that was not the worst part. The Altarian looked up. "What was the worst part?" "Sergeant Amy Carter." Thexnol's voice became almost a whisper. 26 years old, former reconnaissance specialist. Harris put her in charge of night operations. He sat back down, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Carter led raids every single night for 3 weeks. She would appear out of nowhere, destroy our supply lines, kill our sentries, and vanish before we could respond. Our thermal sensors could not track her. Our motion detectors could not find her. She moved through our lines like she was invisible. The Krellian leaned forward. Surely you had superior numbers. Numbers meant nothing. Carter was not just fighting us. She was hunting us. Thexanal's mandibles clicked frantically. She would leave messages for us, written in Zephyrian, perfect grammar. She told us she was sorry for killing our soldiers, but she could not let us hurt the civilians in the facility. Dr. Martinez stopped writing. She apologized. Every night, she would destroy a supply depot or eliminate a patrol, and then leave. A handwritten note apologizing for the deaths. She said she hoped the war would end soon so our people could go home to their families. Thexanal's voice cracked slightly. She killed 47 of my soldiers over 3 weeks, and she apologized for every single death. The room became very quiet. Outside the station, a transport ship passed by the window, its lights blinking slowly in the darkness. The Altarian spoke carefully. What ended the siege? Thexanal's compound eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Private Ryan Hughes, 19 years old, barely past human maturity age. He had been working in the mines for maybe 6 months before the war started. The Krellian adjusted his breathing apparatus. What did he do? We had brought up our heaviest weapon, a siege walker, 40 feet tall, armed with plasma cannons and missile pods. It could level the entire facility in minutes. Harris knew it was over when he saw it. Thexanal's voice became stronger, filled with something that sounded like awe. Hughes volunteered to stop it, alone. He took a plasma cutter from the mining equipment and ran straight at the walker. No cover, no support, no chance of survival. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. And? He climbed onto the walker while it was firing at the facility. The pilot tried to shake him off, but Hughes held on. He used the plasma cutter to cut through the armor plating while the walker's defensive systems were shooting at him. Thexanal stood up again, his 6 arms gesturing as he spoke. I watched through my scope. Hughes was on fire. His clothes had been burned off by the walker's defensive lasers. His skin was black and bleeding, but he kept cutting. He cut through layer after layer of armor until he reached the power core. The Altarian stopped writing. What happened then? The walker exploded. The blast could be seen from orbit. Hughes was at the center of it. Thexanal's voice became quiet again. But before he died, he activated his comm unit. He told Carter and the other defenders exactly where he had cut through the armor. He gave them the walker's weak point so they could destroy the next one. The Krellian's breathing apparatus hissed. Did he survive the explosion? Thexanal nodded slowly. For about 10 minutes. Long enough for Harris to reach him. Long enough to hear Hughes ask if the civilians were safe. When Harris told him yes, Hughes smiled and closed his eyes. Dr. Martinez set down her pen entirely. What happened after that? We withdrew. Thexanal's voice carried shame and confusion. 3 battalions of Zephyrian soldiers withdrew from a mining facility defended by 300 human civilians. We had lost over 1,000 troops. They had lost 37. He moved back to the window looking out at the stars. But we did not withdraw because of casualties. We withdrew because we could not understand what we were fighting. Hughes had given his life to save people he barely knew. Carter apologized for killing enemies who were trying to kill her. Harris had turned miners and technicians into soldiers who fought like they were defending their own children. The tribunal room remained silent for a long time. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke, her voice barely audible. Commander, you said this changed your understanding of humans. How? Thexanal turned back to face them, his compound eyes reflecting the room's bright lights. Doctor, in Zephyrian military doctrine, soldiers fight for territory, resources, or glory. We fight to win. But at Crimson Ridge, I learned that humans fight for something else entirely. They fight for each other. They fight for ideas. They fight for people they have never met and never will meet. He sat back down, his scarred carapace creaking. That is what made them so dangerous. We could destroy their weapons, We could cut their supply lines. We could even kill their bodies, but we could not kill what they were fighting for. The tribunal took a break after Thexnal finished his account of Crimson Ridge. Dr. Martinez left the room first, her face pale and drawn. The Altarian and Krellian members spoke quietly to each other in the corner, their voices too low for anyone else to hear. Thexnal remained in his chair, staring at his reflection in the polished metal table. When the session resumed an hour later, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The tribunal members seemed more careful with their questions, as if they were afraid of what they might hear next. Dr. Martinez settled back into her chair and picked up her pen. Commander, you mentioned that your understanding of humans continued to evolve throughout the war. Can you tell us about other significant encounters? Thexnal's mandibles clicked softly as he considered the question. 6 months after Crimson Ridge, I was promoted again. Fleet Commander. They gave me the battlecruiser Vengeance of Altair and told me to patrol the neutral zone. Our mission was to intercept human supply ships and transport vessels. The Altarian looked up from her notes. This was standard military procedure? Yes. Cut off supplies to human colonies. Force them to surrender through economic pressure, rather than direct assault. Thexnal's compound eyes reflected the room's lights. High Command thought it would be easier than fighting human defenders directly. The Krellian adjusted his breathing apparatus. But you encountered something unexpected. Thexnal nodded slowly. 3 weeks into the patrol, we detected a lone human vessel in the shipping lanes, a converted cargo hauler called the Defiance. Our sensors showed minimal weapons and a crew of only 12 humans. It should have been a simple capture. Dr. Martinez made a note. What was different about this encounter? The ship's captain was Steve Parker, 41 years old, former merchant marine who had been running supply missions to the outer colonies since the war began. Thexnal's voice became thoughtful. When we ordered him to surrender, he did something no other ship captain had ever done. The Altarian stopped writing. What did he do? He requested parley. Under the old Galactic War codes, he had the right to speak with the commanding officer before surrendering. Most captains use this to negotiate better terms for their crew. Thexnal's mandibles clicked again. Parker invited me aboard his ship. The room fell silent. The Krellian leaned forward. You went aboard a human vessel? Under a flag of truce. Yes. Standard procedure allows for battlefield meetings between commanders. I thought Parker wanted to discuss surrender terms. Thexnal's voice became quieter. I brought 2 guards and expected to be back on my ship within an hour. Dr. Martinez set down her pen. What did you find when you boarded the Defiance? Thexnal stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly in the eternal dance of space. The ship was nothing like I expected. It was clean, organized. The crew moved with purpose and discipline. But that was not what surprised me. He turned back to face the tribunal. The medical bay was full of wounded, not just humans. Zephyrians too. Parker's crew was treating prisoners of war with the same care they gave their own injured. The Altarian's voice carried disbelief. They were treating enemy wounded? Dr. Helen Brooks was the ship's medic, 34 years old. She had been a civilian doctor before the war. When I saw her working on a Zephyrian soldier who had been badly burned, I asked her why she was wasting medical supplies on an enemy. Thexnal's compound eyes dimmed as he remembered. She looked at me like I had asked her why she breathed air. She said that injured beings needed medical care, and it did not matter what species they were or what uniform they wore. The Krellians' breathing apparatus cycled loudly in the quiet room. How did they acquire Zephyrian prisoners? That was what Parker wanted to show me. 3 days earlier, they had detected a distress signal from a Zephyrian patrol craft. The ship had been damaged in an asteroid field and was losing life support. The crew was dying. Thexnal moved back to his chair but remained standing. Parker had diverted from his supply mission to rescue the survivors. He risked his ship, his crew, and his cargo to save Zephyrian soldiers who had been trying to kill humans just days before. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Why did he do this? I asked. Him the same question. Parker said that leaving sentient beings to die in space was not something humans could do, and still call themselves human. Thexnall's voice carried a note of confusion that had never left him. He said it was not about politics or war or species, loyalty. It was about being alive and recognizing life in others. The Altarian made notes rapidly. What was your response? I did not understand. In Zephyrian military doctrine, enemies are resources to be eliminated or obstacles to be overcome. The idea of risking your own mission to save enemy lives made no tactical sense. Thexnall sat down heavily. But Parker was not finished showing me things that made no sense. The Krellian adjusted his position. What else did he show you? Engineer Pete Collins. 28 years old. He had been modifying the ship's life, support systems to accommodate Zephyrian physiology. The rescued prisoners needed different atmospheric pressure and temperature than humans. Collins had been working for 3 days straight to keep them alive. Thexnall's mandibles clicked rapidly. When I asked Collins why he was endangering his own crew by diverting power and resources to enemy prisoners, he said something I will never forget. Dr. Martinez stopped writing. What did he say? He said that the Zephyrians on his ship were not enemies anymore. They were passengers, beings who needed help. He said that once you decide to save someone's life, their species and politics stop mattering. All that matters is keeping them alive. The room became very quiet. Outside the station, another ship passed by the window, its running lights blinking, in the darkness. The Altarian spoke carefully. How long did this meeting last? 4 hours. Parker showed me every part of his ship. The cargo hold was full of medical supplies and food for human colonies that were under siege. The crew quarters had been converted to hold more wounded. The bridge had been modified to run on minimal power so more energy could go to life support. Thexnall's voice became stronger. Every human on that ship had given up comfort, safety, and resources to save lives. Not just human lives. Any lives they encountered. They had turned a cargo ship into a floating hospital and rescue vessel. The Krellian leaned forward. What happened when your meeting ended? That was when I learned something else about humans that our intelligence had never reported. As we were preparing to return to my ship, our sensors detected a human battle group approaching. 5 warships led by Admiral Kate Sullivan. Thexnall's compound eyes fixed on Dr. Martinez. My ship was outgunned and outnumbered. The human fleet could have destroyed us easily, but Admiral Sullivan opened communication channels and made an offer. Dr. Martinez picked up her pen again. What kind of offer? Safe passage. She would escort my battle cruiser back to Zephyrian space if I guaranteed the safety of Parker's ship and crew. No attacks, no pursuit, no interference with their mission. The Altarian looked up from her notes. You accepted? I had no choice. But that was not the remarkable part. The remarkable part was that Admiral Sullivan kept her word. For 6 days, human warships escorted my vessel through space controlled by human forces. They protected us from their own patrol ships. They shared navigation data to help us avoid hazards. They even provided medical supplies when our doctor requested them. Thexnall stood up again, his 6 arms gesturing as he spoke. Dr. Martinez, your people had every tactical advantage. They could have destroyed my ship and taken valuable prisoners. Instead, they honored an agreement made to protect a cargo vessel full of wounded enemies. The Krellian's breathing apparatus hissed. How did this encounter change your perspective? It taught me that humans have a concept we do not have in Zephyrian culture. Honor that exists independent of advantage. They kept their word not because it benefited them, but because they had given their word. Thexnall moved to the window again, his reflection wavering in the transparent metal. But there was something else. Something that disturbed me more than their tactical decisions. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. What was that? Before we parted ways, Admiral Sullivan sent a personal message to my ship. She said she hoped the war would end soon so both our peoples could work together instead of fighting each other. She said she believed Zephyrians and humans could be allies if we chose cooperation over conquest. His voice became quiet, almost whisper-soft. She was not trying to convert me or convince me to defect. She was simply expressing hope that beings from different worlds could find common ground, that we could build something together instead of destroying each other. The tribunal room remained silent for several minutes. Finally, the Altarian spoke. "Commander, you said this encounter was significant. How did it affect your actions for the rest of the war?" Thexnel turned back to face them, his compound eyes reflecting the bright lights of the room. "It made me start asking questions that no Zephyrian commander had ever asked before. Questions about why we were fighting. Questions about what we hoped to achieve. Questions about whether conquest was the only way species could interact with each other." He sat back down, his scarred carapace creaking under his weight. The tribunal session had been running for hours now. Dr. Martinez looked tired, her gray hair slightly disheveled and dark circles under her eyes. The Altarian had refilled her water glass 3 times, and the Krellian's breathing apparatus made longer, deeper cycles as if he too was feeling the weight of what he was hearing. Thexnel had not moved from his chair for the last 30 minutes. His 6 arms rested motionless on the table, his compound eyes staring at something only he could see. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a heaviness that seemed to fill the entire room. The final battle of the war took place on Titan's Gate, a fortress world that protected the main shipping routes to Earth. High Command decided that if we could take Titan's Gate, we could force humanity to surrender. The Altarian looked up from her notes. "You were part of this final assault?" "I commanded the ground forces. By then, I had been promoted to Supreme Field Commander. The entire Zephyrian fleet was committed to this battle. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we had." Thexenal's mandibles clicked softly. It was supposed to be the decisive blow that would end the war. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "What made Titan's Gate so important?" "Location. The world sat at the center of 7 different hyperspace routes. Control Titan's Gate and you could cut off Earth from all its outer colonies, force them to negotiate from a position of weakness." Thexenal's voice became bitter. "Our intelligence said the planet had strong orbital defenses but limited ground forces." The Krellian adjusted his breathing apparatus. "Intelligence was wrong again?" "Intelligence was always wrong about humans. Always." Thexnel stood up and walked to the window. "When we arrived at Titan's Gate, the orbital battle lasted for 18 hours. We lost 60% of our fleet, but we finally established orbital supremacy. The ground assault could begin." He turned back to face the tribunal. General Marcus Webb commanded the human ground forces, 57 years old. Career military officer with 40 years of experience. Our files said he had never lost a major. Engagement. The Altarian made notes. "How many troops did each side have?" "We landed with 800,000 soldiers. The humans had maybe 50,000 defenders plus civilian volunteers." Thexenal's compound eyes dimmed. "The odds were 16-1 in our favor. It should have been a massacre." Dr. Martinez set down her pen. But it was not. The humans had been preparing for 6 months. Webb had turned the entire planet into a weapon. Thexenal's voice became quiet, almost reverential. "When we began the ground assault, we found that there was no ground to assault." The Krellian leaned forward. "Explain." Webb had ordered the construction of tunnel networks that connected every major city, every defensive position, every supply depot. The planet's surface was just camouflage. The real battle was happening underground in passages and chambers that our maps did not show. Thexnel sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight. Major Laura Kim led the engineering corps that built these tunnels. 39 years old, civil engineer before the war. She had spent 6 months turning solid rock into a maze that stretched across 3 continents. The Altarian looked up. "How extensive were these tunnel systems?" 50,000 kilometers of passages, hidden chambers that could hold entire battalions, supply routes that connected positions hundreds of kilometers apart, emergency bunkers with enough food and water to last for years. Thexenal's mandibles clicked rapidly. Kim had essentially built a second planet underneath the first one. Dr. Martinez made a note. "How did this affect your assault?" "Every position we captured was empty. Every building we secured was a trap. Every corridor we advanced down led to ambush points that Kim's teams had prepared months in advance. Thexanol's voice carried frustration and admiration in equal measure. We were not fighting an army. We were fighting an entire world that had been designed to kill us. The Krellian's breathing apparatus cycled loudly. What kind of traps did you encounter? Explosive charges in every doorway. Poison gas canisters in the ventilation systems. Automated weapons that fired from concealed positions. But worse than the traps were the messages. Thexanol stood up again, his 6 arms moving restlessly. Kim's teams had left recordings in every position, not military communications. Personal messages. Videos of human soldiers explaining why they were fighting. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. What kind of messages? Corporal Dan Martinez recorded a message for his 8-year-old daughter. He told her that he was sorry he would not be coming home, but that he hoped she would grow up in a universe where humans and Zephyrians could be friends. He said he was not fighting because he hated us, but because he loved her. Thexanol's compound. Eyes reflected the room's lights as he continued. Lieutenant Carol Foster left instructions for any Zephyrian soldiers who found her position. She told them where to find the wounded civilians in Shelter 7 Alpha. She asked us to take care of them because they were just families trying to stay alive. The room fell completely silent. Even the air recycling system seemed to quiet down, as if the station itself was listening to the testimony. The Altarian spoke carefully. These messages were left for your soldiers to find? Yes. Each position contained detailed instructions on how to care for human wounded, where to find medical supplies, and how to contact civilian evacuation centers. Thexanol's voice cracked slightly. Foster's final message asked us to tell her mother that she died protecting people she loved. Krellian adjusted his position in his chair. How did your soldiers react to these messages? That was when I began to lose control of my own forces. Soldiers would secure a position, find these recordings, and then refuse to advance further. They would sit in captured bunkers, listening to humans apologize for fighting us while asking us to save their civilians. Thexanol moved back to the window, his reflection wavering in the transparent metal. Sergeant Tony Liu left the most disturbing message of all. He was in charge of the planet's main reactor facility. He explained that if the Zephyrian assault reached the reactor core, he would detonate it to prevent our victory. Dr. Martinez stopped writing entirely. He was threatening to destroy the planet? Not threatening. Apologizing. Liu's message lasted 47 minutes. He explained exactly how the reactor detonation would work, how much time our forces would have to evacuate, and which routes would be safest for our retreat. Thexanol's voice became barely audible. He spent most of the recording talking about his family. His wife was a teacher. His son wanted to be a pilot. His daughter collected rocks from different planets. He showed pictures of them and said he hoped that someday Zephyrian children and human children could play together. The tribunal. Room remained silent for several minutes. Finally, the Krellian spoke. Did he detonate the reactor? On the 43rd day of the siege, when our forces finally reached the reactor complex, Liu activated the detonation sequence. But first, he opened communication channels to every Zephyrian unit on the planet. Thexanol's compound eyes fixed on something beyond the window. He told us we had 20 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. He gave us detailed evacuation routes and wished us a safe journey home. The Altarian's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to the planet? The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The entire planet became a miniature sun for about 30 seconds. Everything on the surface was vaporized instantly. Thexanol turned back to face the tribunal. But Liu had kept his word. Every Zephyrian soldier who followed his evacuation instructions survived. Dr. Martinez looked up from her empty notepad. How many human survivors were there? None. General, Webb's final transmission came from his command bunker as the reactor core went critical. He thanked my soldiers for fighting with honor and asked us to remember that the humans who died on Titan's Gate had died hoping for peace between our peoples. Thexanol sat back down, his scarred carapace catching the light. Webb's last words, were a request that we take care of any Zephyrian wounded during our evacuation. He said that all beings deserve to go home to their families, regardless of which side they fought on. The Krellian's breathing apparatus made deep, slow cycles. Commander, you said this was the final battle of the war, but it sounds like the humans lost. Thexenol's mandibles clicked softly. The humans lost the battle, yes. They lost the planet. They lost 50,000 soldiers and millions of civilians, but they did not lose the war. The Altarian looked confused. How is that possible? Because by the time we evacuated from Titan's Gate, 60% of my soldiers were refusing to fight humans anymore. They had listened to too many messages from enemy soldiers who apologized for killing us while asking us to save their families. Thexenol's voice became stronger, more certain. Webb and his defenders had not just destroyed a planet. They had destroyed our will to continue the war. How do you fight an enemy who dies wishing you peace? How do you conquer a people who spend their final moments hoping your children will be friends with their children? Dr. Martinez set down her pen completely. What happened after Titan's Gate? I returned to the fleet and submitted my resignation. Half of my commanding officers did the same. The other half reported that their soldiers were experiencing what your psychologists call moral injury. The tribunal room had grown darker as the station rotated, blocking out the light from the nearest star. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the walls, making the space feel smaller and more intimate. Dr. Martinez had stopped taking notes, entirely. The Altarian sat with her hands folded in her lap, her pale blue skin looking almost gray in the dim light. The Krellian's breathing apparatus operated in slow, measured cycles that seemed to match the rhythm of Thexenol's words. Thexenol remained motionless in his chair, his compound eyes reflecting the soft glow of the emergency lighting. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to have accumulated over the long hours of testimony. After Titan's Gate, I returned to Zephyrian space expecting to face court-martial for my resignation. Instead, I found a military command that was falling apart from within. The Altarian looked up. What do you mean? Soldiers throughout the fleet were refusing deployment orders. Officers were submitting resignation letters faster than High Command could process them. The few units still willing to fight were requesting transfers away from human space. Thexenol's mandibles clicked softly. The war machine was breaking down, but not because we lacked weapons or ships or tactical advantages. Dr. Martinez leaned forward despite her exhaustion. Why was it breaking down? Because we could not stop thinking about the humans we had fought, about their messages, about their choices, about the way they treated us even when we were killing them. Thexenol's voice became quieter. Commander Nick Taylor had personally escorted our medical ships through human-controlled space during the evacuation of New Britannia. He could have destroyed our entire medical fleet, but instead he made sure our wounded reached safety. The Krellian adjusted his breathing apparatus. This was during active combat? During the siege of New Britannia, yes. We had surrounded the colony, but the humans were evacuating their civilians through a gap in our blockade. Taylor was leading the escort fighters protecting the evacuation ships. Thexenol stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When our medical convoy got caught in the crossfire, Taylor broke off from his own mission to guide our ships to safety. He transmitted navigation data that helped our doctors avoid the worst of the fighting. The Altarian made a note on her mostly empty pad. Why would he do this? I asked him directly when we met under a flag of truce 3 days later. Taylor said that medical ships should never be targets, regardless of which side they belonged to. He said that doctors and wounded soldiers were not enemies, they were just beings who needed help. Thexenol moved to the window, his reflection visible in the transparent metal. But Taylor was not the only one. Dr. Patricia Young had developed medical treatments that saved thousands of Zephyrian lives. She published her research openly, sharing it with our military doctors even though we were still at war. Dr. Martinez spoke softly. She shared medical advances with her enemies. Dr. Young said that disease and injury were the real enemies, not the beings who suffered from them. She had developed a treatment for plasma burns that reduced scarring. by 70%. Instead of keeping it secret for military advantage, she broadcast the procedure on open channels so our field medics could use it. Thexanol's compound eyes fixed on something beyond the window. I received treatment from Dr. Young's procedures myself. The scars you see on my carapace would have been much worse without her research. Every day, I was reminded that a human doctor had worked to reduce my suffering. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the air recycling system. The Krellian leaned forward slightly. Commander, you said the war ended because of these encounters. Can you explain what you mean? Thexnol turned back to face the tribunal, his 6 arms held at his sides. 3 months after Titan's Gate, I was recalled to the homeworld for debriefing. High Command wanted to understand why so many units were refusing to fight. They thought it was a failure of leadership or training. The Altarian looked up from her notes. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That we were not fighting a conventional enemy. That humans fought according to principles we had never encountered before. That every engagement taught us something about their character that made the next engagement harder to justify. Thexanol sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight. The High Command did not understand. They assigned new commanders, transferred problematic units, issued new orders about fighting with proper aggression. But the problem was not with our soldiers or our tactics. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. What was the problem? The problem was that we had learned something about humans that we could not unlearn. We had seen them show mercy when they had every reason for revenge. We had watched them sacrifice themselves for beings they had never met. We had received kindness from people we had been ordered to kill. Thexanol's voice became stronger, more certain. How do you order a soldier to attack a hospital ship when he knows the human doctors aboard will treat his wounds if he is captured? How do you command an assault on a colony when your troops have read messages from the defenders hoping for peace between our children? The Krellian's breathing apparatus cycled loudly in the quiet room. So the war ended because of military rebellion? Not rebellion. Conscience. Thexanol's mandibles clicked softly. Individual soldiers, then entire units, then whole fleets began requesting transfers to non-combat roles. They would serve the military, but they would not fight humans anymore. The Altarian set down her pen. How did High Command respond? They tried everything. New propaganda about human weakness. Stories about human atrocities that our intelligence had fabricated. Threats of court-martial for any soldier who refused combat orders. Thexanol's compound eyes reflected the dim lighting. But you cannot use propaganda to erase direct experience. Every Zephyrian who had fought humans knew the truth about their character. Dr. Martinez spoke carefully. What was the final decision to end the war? Admiral Korthvan, the Supreme Naval Commander, made the announcement 6 months after Titan's Gate. He said that the war was concluded by mutual agreement between the High Command and Earth's leadership. But that was not the whole truth. Thexanol stood up again, his movements slow and deliberate. The real truth was that we could no longer field effective combat forces against humanity. Our soldiers had been morally defeated by an enemy who treated them with unexpected compassion. The room remained silent for several minutes. Outside the station, a deep space transport passed by the window, its running lights blinking steadily in the darkness. The Krellian spoke first. Commander, what happened to you after the war ended? I spent 2 years in debriefing sessions, psychological evaluation, and mandatory re-education programs. The military wanted to understand how exposure to human combat tactics had affected veteran soldiers. Thexanol's voice carried a bitter edge. They thought they could train the compassion out of us. The Altarian looked up. Did these programs work? No. If anything, they made us more determined to find a different way to live. Many veterans requested permission to emigrate to human space. Others became advocates for peaceful contact with Earth. Some, like myself, volunteered to serve in diplomatic roles. Dr. Martinez made a final note on her pad. Is that why you are here now? To serve as a diplomat? I am here because I want to learn from the species that taught me the difference between strength and brutality, between victory and honor, between Conquest and cooperation. Thexanol's compound eyes fixed on the human woman across from him. I want to understand how humans became the kind of beings who apologize to their enemies while asking them to save civilian lives. The tribunal room grew quiet again. The emergency lighting cast shifting shadows as the station continued its slow rotation. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke, her voice barely audible. Commander, what do you think humans can teach other species? Thexanol moved back to the window, his reflection wavering in the transparent metal. Dr. Martinez, humans showed us that the strongest beings are not those who can cause the most damage, but those who choose not to cause damage when they have the power to do so. He turned back to face the tribunal one final time. Every human, soldier I encountered had opportunities to show cruelty, to seek revenge, to abandon their principles for tactical advantage. But they chose differently. They chose to remain human even when being human made their military situation more difficult. The Altarian closed her notepad. What do you hope to accomplish now? I have requested permission to return to human space. Not as a conqueror or an observer, but as a student. I want to learn how to build the kind of society that produces beings like Captain Morrison, Sergeant Carter, Private Hughes, Captain Parker, Dr. Brooks, and all the others. Thexanol's voice became strong and clear. I want to help other species understand what I learned during the war, that there is a better way to exist in this universe, a way based on cooperation instead of conquest, on compassion instead of cruelty, on building instead of destroying. The Krellian's breathing apparatus made one final deep cycle. And you believe humans can teach this? I believe humans have already begun teaching this. To us, to other species who have encountered them, to anyone willing to learn. Thexanol's mandibles clicked one last time.